The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It's become super popular since the William Barr letter was released a few weeks ago for people on the right and even some people on the left who we've talked about, so-called Russia skeptics, to make a really big show out of demanding apologies from people. Are you ready to apologize for being so wrong about Russia? Are you ready to apologize to your viewers, to Donald Trump, to everybody else? But now that we've actually gotten the Mueller report, which we did sort of midday, late last week on Thursday, almost everything that was asserted by serious investigative news outlets and reported by them during the 2 years of this investigation has been confirmed to be true by the Mueller report, at least to some degree. And I wish I didn't have to do the following disclaimers and clarifications, but I do because of the political environment in which we're currently operating. I need to be super clear. I don't want to confuse anybody. Donald Trump hasn't been caught personally colluding with Vladimir Putin. Nobody was seriously claiming that the outcome of the Mueller investigation was going to be Donald Trump caught personally colluding with Vladimir Putin on the 2016 election. As William Barr, Donald Trump's attorney general, said during his press conference last week, no one on Trump's campaign personally participated in Russia's hacking of Hillary Clinton or the DNC. But again, nobody was claiming that Trump's campaign was specifically involved in that hacking. But now that we've actually had the time to go through the Mueller report, more than 450 pages almost of the Mueller report in detail, the deniers, if anybody, are the ones who owe other people apologies, and I'm going to explain it to you. And let me be super clear. If you're going to write to me and tell me that I'm wrong in what I'm telling you here, and you haven't actually looked through the Mueller report, you have no basis for telling me that I'm wrong, because everything I'm going to tell you today is out of the Mueller report. We had this 2-year campaign by Donald Trump and the right, and even some on the left, to call reporting on Russia fake news, to call serious reports about what Donald Trump and his people did in the 2016 election and during the investigation conspiracy theories. Whatever term you want to apply to it, the Mueller report tells us that most of the reports were accurate, at least to a significant degree. And again, if you haven't looked at the Mueller report, then what exactly are you going to argue with me about when I know many of you are going to send me angry messages and comments and tweets? Let's start, for example, with the Trump Tower meeting. Don Jr., Don Sr., Right Wing News, Hannity, whoever else, they all said ad nauseum, the meeting was basically nothing. It was an afterthought. It's not a story. No one within the Trump organization, campaign organization, was really counting on or putting much weight on that infamous meeting with the Russian lawyer. The Mueller report confirms that Trump Jr. immediately was super interested in this meeting. It was communicated within the campaign. Everybody was really eager to get dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Russians. The reporting on the story was almost completely accurate despite all of the denials. Still doesn't mean Trump personally colluded with Putin. Nobody was seriously saying that was going to be the outcome. The pending information that they were waiting on was discussed at campaign staff meetings before the meeting took place. Campaign staffers were sitting around waiting for the information. This was a big deal internally. It was reported about 15 months ago. It was reported more than 15 months ago, and the reports were effectively completely accurate. Another example. More than a year ago, it was reported that Donald Trump ordered Don McGahn, the White House counsel, to fire Robert Mueller. And Don McGahn reportedly refused, saying, we're not going to do that. That would be a bad idea. Those reports were called fake news by Trump. It was called fake news by Fox News. And the Mueller report confirms that the reports were true. It happened exactly as was reported. The Washington Post, back in 2017, reported that Paul Manafort was briefing government-connected Russians on the Trump-Clinton campaign of 2016. Hannity said, you can't trust the Washington Post. They're constantly reporting false stuff. The Mueller report confirms that it was taking place, the briefings were taking place by Paul Manafort of government-connected Russians exactly as the Washington Post reported. Another example, remember that story from BuzzFeed which claimed that Trump told Michael Cohen to lie to Congress, and it was widely touted as fake news, Trump touting it as fake news and the enemy of the people and all of that stuff. Well, if you look at the actual content of the Mueller report, it, quote, finds that Cohen lied, and he did so at what he believed to be the president's behest, that the president knew he was giving false testimony, and that the president's lawyers encouraged that testimony. In his report, Mueller wrote that Trump's attorney told Cohen to, quote, stay on message and not contradict the president. It's confirmation of the story. I could go on. I'll give you just another couple of examples. Russia successfully penetrated state voting systems. It was reported on way back when. It was denied, denied, denied. The Mueller report confirms that it's true. Another example. WikiLeaks was reportedly a go-between for Russian hackers and the dissemination of hacked information from the Clinton campaign and the DNC. No, no, no. WikiLeaks is just a clearinghouse of information. They're not political. They're not doing anything with Russia. Well, the Mueller report, again, confirms that the reporting was completely accurate. Another example, and I'm not going to go on all day with these, but there are so many. Trump personally didn't collude, but people under him tried to collude, like, for example, Don Jr. When it came to Don Jr. coordinating the Trump Tower Russia meeting, the Mueller report actually says that it appears Don Jr. was too dumb to know what he was doing might be criminal. Quote from the report, the office considered whether this evidence would establish a conspiracy to violate the foreign contributions ban, solicitation of an illegal foreign source contribution, or the acceptance or receipt of an express or implied promise to make a foreign source contribution. There are reasonable arguments that the offered information would constitute a thing of value within the meaning of these provisions, just like we've been saying, but the office determined that the government would not be likely to obtain and sustain a conviction for two other reasons. First, the office did not obtain admissible evidence likely to meet the government's burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these individuals acted willfully, meaning with general knowledge of the illegality of their conduct, and second, the government would likely encounter difficulty proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the value of the promised information exceeded the threshold for a criminal violation. Donald Trump Jr. did it, but he was too dumb to reasonably believe, according to what Mueller says, that he was committing a crime. The other glaring revelation from the report is that a ton of people lied to investigators and aren't being charged. I'll give you an example. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos's brother, Eric Prince, who famously ran that mercenary firm, Blackwater, before it was renamed multiple times, testified under oath and lied many times. Prince said he had no official or unofficial role in the campaign or transition, but it turns out he had multiple meetings with high-level campaign officials at Trump Tower, including with people like Don Jr. Clearly, this is at minimum an unofficial role in Trump's transition and campaign. He claimed that when he went to the Seychelles in January of 2017, it was to meet with clients from the United Arab Emirates. Turns out that it was actually Trump-associated individuals who set up those meetings, not the UAE, another lie to investigators. Prince claimed under oath that he never communicated with Steve Bannon regarding the UAE or U.S.-Russia relations. Well, we now know of text messages between Eric Prince and Steve Bannon during the time that Prince was in the UAE. It's all spelled out in the Mueller report. And again, it's all details, but these details continue to expose that lots of people lied and they are not facing consequences. So, are there fair criticisms of reporting on the Russia probe? Absolutely. Corporate media was hyperbolic in many cases. Corporate media devoted way too many of these 8 or 12 person panels to the probe. Sure, I'm on board with you. People got carried away with the probe in terms of reporting. Some Democrats got carried away, thinking the probe would ultimately take down Trump, which I've been saying for more than a year that it would not. But if you look at the reporting from investigative sources, serious ones, and you compare the claims they made to what is in the Mueller report, most of those stories were correct. So the reporters who I won't even name, who are agreeing that the Mueller report confirms the coverage was wrong for years, I mean, they're just wrong. And the Mueller report is the proof that they're wrong. And the delusions are running rampant. And my ideal situation is one where, forget about the right because we know that they're lost. I hope that the left can come together and agree that basically most of the reporting was right, most of the serious allegations were correct, the expectation that the report would take Trump down was never reasonable, and that now we can say, hey guys, we've got 2020, because otherwise we are going to see Trump reelected in 2020, and we will have another 4 years of this. So once again, I believe that the left is slowly coming to a consensus agreement, the entire left, about what took place and what didn't took place. And it would be good to do that and to get past the partisan, not even partisan, the internal bickering that has taken over a lot of sort of enclaves of the left. And we've got to move on to 2020. The United States has fallen to 48th in the world in press freedom, right below Botswana and Chile and Romania. And when we talk about American exceptionalism, there are areas where the U.S. legitimately leads the world, but there are also areas where many Americans think we are at the top, and we're actually not. So like an example would be infant mortality. Among the developed world, the United States is near the worst when it comes to infant mortality. Education. If you look at math and science test scores for kids, we're way behind a lot of the world in the United States. The so-called business climate, which many think is so great in the United States, turns out there are lots and lots of countries where the environment is better for entrepreneurship and for starting businesses than in the United States. When it comes to freedom of speech and specifically freedom of the press, we might think that we're near the top, but we're actually not. Even though you might think journalists are able to just do their thing, everyone's free to report on those in power, it's all delightful in the United States. It's not. And the new Press Freedom Index from Reporters Without Borders has the U.S. down even further from 45th to 48th in the world, right below Botswana, Chile, and Romania, and now solidly in a section of countries called problematic from a freedom of the press standpoint. Norway is again at the top. Sweden is near the top, the Netherlands, and the reason why the United States continues to slide partially has to do with Donald Trump's continued attacks on the press. This is actually a global trend that we're seeing in total. Journalistic independence has been sort of pushed down over the last year. Safety for journalists globally is down. But in terms of the United States, you've got Donald Trump's anti-media rhetoric, more and more journalists needing security protection, Trump talking about requiring journalism licenses, Trump talking about making it easier to sue media outlets, Trump talking about shutting media outlets down, Trump talking about how it would be nice to have state media, and this is fomenting a sort of climate of disbelief towards media outlets, and it's part of this package that Donald Trump embodies of authoritarian strongman behavior, which around the world is increasing violence against journalists, as we've seen with a number of stories over the last several weeks. When Trump says, what you're hearing and what you're seeing, you shouldn't believe it, you should believe me instead. That is extraordinarily anti-freedom of the press and trust of the press. And then there's another aspect to this that's really important, but it's not always discussed. The right-wing nationalists who do the entire, if you question the commander-in-chief, if you question our healthcare system, if you question our military engagements, you're not patriotic and you're anti-American, that same ideology foments the anti-media sentiment. When media critically reports on what the government is doing, which they should, right? I mean, you've got to hold the powerful accountable. The nationalist sentiment that brands individuals as unpatriotic for questioning the government does the same thing to media. In the same way that there is an enclave of nationalists in the US who, if you question, what the hell are we doing in Iraq, for example, you're branded as unpatriotic. If you are a media outlet that questions what we're doing in Iraq, to use the same example, you were equally branded as unpatriotic, and it is creating and catalyzing and growing this anti-media environment in a way that is literally physically dangerous for journalists in the United States and elsewhere. And there's a growing portion of the American population that actually agrees with Donald Trump that the media is the enemy of the people, that you can't believe what you're seeing and hearing with your own eyes. And this is a massive problem. And the more people believe this, the worse it's going to get for journalists and for press freedom. If you believe in American exceptionalism, then you shouldn't be happy with being ranked 48th in press freedom when it's codified in the Constitution of the United States, in the Bill of Rights to the Constitution of the United States. If you really want to talk about American exceptionalism, we should be disgusted that we're 48th in terms of press freedom. I want to hear from you about this. I'm on Twitter at dpacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Let me know what you think.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me say thanks to today's new member of the day, David Davis. David, thank you so much for supporting the show. Also want to say thanks to Rory Conrad, who's our longtime sustaining Hall of Fame member of the day. He's been with us almost 5 years, dating all the way back to 2014. David and Rory, thank you. Please sign up and join them at joinpakman.com. Coupon code, this is 2020, saves you 40%. Okay, this is a really great opportunity to support some awesome musicians in our audience. J.D. Eicher is a musician who is a big fan of the David Pakman Show. His drummer, Dylan, has been a member for years, also a really great supporter of the show. And J.D. Eicher is a singer-songwriter out of Youngstown, Ohio. And I actually know a little bit about Youngstown, Ohio, because one of our earliest radio affiliates is located in Youngstown. And Youngstown is, to put it lightly, an economically ravaged place in the United States, and Youngstown has been supporting our show for a really long time by broadcasting it on one of the local radio stations. And J.D. Eicher has a new song out called Money Back, which is about the Trump era and about sort of not allowing this new era of politics to be normalized, which we're going to listen to a little bit of now while we talk about it. So anyway, J.D. got in touch, and he and Dylan, who's a member, and his band are touring Europe right now. They've been listening to the show on the road. They wanted to sponsor some memberships and have me mention their new song. So what they're doing is sponsoring 8 half-price memberships. They've already paid for half of the normal cost of memberships, which is $60 for 8 people. So if you want one of these 8 half-price memberships, you just pay the other $30. You end up getting a 50% discount. And in order to take advantage of those, just get in touch with me, David at davidpakman.com, or use the contact form on our website. But either way, please check out J.D. Eicher's song, Money Back, on Spotify. This helps them out. They're helping us out, which is awesome. Add the track to your playlists. Check out the entire album called The Compass EP. But again, they're sponsoring 8 half-price memberships. If you want one of those at half price, get in touch with me directly, which you can do using the contact form at davidpakman.com, or just email me, david at davidpakman.com. I'll be your personal membership concierge. Say, I want one of those J.D. Eicher half-price memberships, and I'll send you a code. First come, first serve, as usual. So I would jump on it. I would anticipate these aren't going to last too long. Thanks again to J.D. Eicher. Okay, there's something really interesting going on. The right has been totally bamboozled by the, quite frankly, as I've said before, very well done exoneration campaign that has been waged by Donald Trump around the Mueller report. But if there's any good news to be gleaned from the reaction to the Mueller report, it's that the country overall doesn't actually seem to have fallen for it. And Donald Trump's approval rating has dropped to the lowest of 2019 so far since the Mueller report was published. And I've already told you how well executed Donald Trump's plan was from the get-go for appealing to his base. He put in William Barr as Attorney General. William Barr is an expert in covering up presidential wrongdoing. Barr wrote this 4-page public relations document, which was then used to justify a nationwide exoneration tour and right-wing media tour for Donald Trump and his advisors. Then the Mueller report actually comes out, but before it's released, William Barr gives this propaganda press conference on Thursday morning, effectively framing Trump as a victim of a totally unfair investigation that William Barr implied didn't make any sense to even do from the beginning. That's what they did, but as I already told you, when you look at the content of the Mueller report, it's extraordinarily damning to Donald Trump and to everybody around him. It states that there's, quote, substantial evidence that Donald Trump obstructed justice. It confirms almost every major investigative story that was reported over the last 2 years related to the probe and the campaign, as we already talked about at the top of the show today. And it seems that while Donald Trump's exoneration propaganda campaign worked really well with his base, it doesn't appear to be working well with the American public in total, because there's a new Reuters Ipsos poll which has Donald Trump's approval down to 37%. This is the lowest of 2019. 68% of Americans say they are more likely than before the report came out to believe that Donald Trump or his cronies committed crimes. Half the country believes that Donald Trump tried to stop the Mueller investigation, which is disturbing that it's only 50%. It should be 100% because he actually admitted to this on national television. So now we have to ask the question of whether this is good news or bad news. And unfortunately, even though it's good that the Mueller report propaganda campaign has not convinced all of the country, it seems to really have worked mostly on Donald Trump's base. There's a lot of bad news here. And the bad news is that while it's good that Trump's approval rating is down as a result of the Mueller report, because it should be, because the Mueller report contains endless damning evidence about what Donald Trump and the people around him did, his approval rating should have already been down to just his hardcore base months ago, that it shouldn't actually move with news like the Mueller report. What I mean is that there's some portion of the population, I've guessed before that it's in the range of 28 to 30, maybe 32%, which is what I call the shoot someone on Fifth Avenue crowd, meaning that no matter what Donald Trump does, they're going to support him, even if he shoots someone on Fifth Avenue, as Donald Trump, I guess you could say, joked about a couple of times. If you're not in that 28 to 30% base, you should have been so disgusted with Donald Trump already that it shouldn't really move the approval rating for Donald Trump to be so exposed as involved in so much wrongdoing by the Mueller report. If you think back to George W. Bush, I believe that his low approval rating ever was maybe 29%, maybe 28%, something like that. And that seems to sort of be what I would call the partisan floor for a president, given how polarized American politics is. 28, 29, 30 seems to be kind of like rock bottom. No matter what a president does, they're not going to go below that. Tax cuts for the rich should have already dropped. Anyone who is reacting to the facts should have already dropped Trump's approval rating to that rock bottom. Broken promise after broken promise should have already gotten us down to just that hardcore base. Caging kids should have gotten us down to just that hardcore base. Trying to take healthcare away from tens of millions of people, inciting white supremacy and anti-Semitism and xenophobia. The fact that there's anybody left supporting Trump who's actually influenced by the news is concerning to me. And the sort of the good news, it's always good when the country reacts correctly by saying, oh, I just learned about X, I no longer support the president. That's good. But the bad news is that Trump still has more than just his base supporting him. There are people beyond just the Fifth Avenue, shoot someone on Fifth Avenue crowd who are saying, I'm looking at what Trump is doing and I'm actually deciding that I like it. And that's extraordinarily concerning. And that gets us to 2020. I've said this before. It bears repeating. When half the country doesn't vote, with 37% approval and 50% turnout, you can win. Okay? With 18, 19% of the total voting public voting for Trump, with the electoral college system that we have, Trump can win re-election easily, assuming that he campaigns in the right places and gets the votes in the right places. Which means, once again, that if we were waiting for the Mueller probe to take down Trump, that was always a bad idea, as I've been telling you for years at this point. But it's really time to realize that 2020 is going to be about turnout. That being said, momentum for impeachment of the president is growing, and I'm going to talk about that after today's interview. I still don't think it's a good political strategy. I still don't think it's likely to actually do anything before the November 2020 election, but the Mueller report has had the effect of reinvigorating what I would call more serious conversations about impeachment, and we will talk about those later in the show after our interview. Make sure you're following the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Make sure you follow me on Instagram as well at david.pakman. I actually posted a picture from a Passover Seder I attended over the weekend, and it angered a lot of people. Check out the comments. Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. Quick break, plenty more coming up right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Tom Rosenstiel, who's an author, journalist, researcher, and media critic, and does so much interesting work in a lot of the areas that we frequently talk about. So I really appreciate you talking to me today, Tom.
Good to be here, Dave.
So, I mean, I think just generally to frame our conversation, one of the conversations we often have about sort of new media and online media are some of the more obvious top-level pros, and I guess I hesitate to say cons, but maybe concerns about online media. And of course, the pros, as I see them, have been the lowering of barriers to entry to getting involved in media and in reporting, increased diversity of voices. We can talk a little bit about whether there's sort of equal access to all of those, but at least putatively, diversity of voices and hearing from more types of people about what's going on in the world. But at the same time, we've seen the echo chambers develop, the algorithms that can sometimes increase political polarization and partisanship to questionable net benefit. We've seen the sort of conspiracy and actual fake news purveyors, to use that term in a very narrow way, not the way our president has necessarily applied it. So how would we, from an objective perspective, start to think about, in the balance, in the net, what has been the influence of the growth of online media?
Well, I mean, you know, as with most phenomenon, the trends move in both directions. So, you know, the answer to are we better off or worse off is yes, both. And so what you really need to understand are what are the ways in which we're different. I think many of the expectations that people had about the digital revolution turned out to be actually off slightly. People were worried about people of color and people who were poorer not actually having access to the internet, and that problem didn't materialize. The data is pretty clear that almost everybody has web access, but it's through mobile, not broadband. The notion that people would be, that there would be more diverse content and that underserved communities would have their own kind of native journalism, that hasn't materialized to nearly the degree that we expected that it would, or that people hoped that it would. In part because you need to have some kind of economic model for that, and to sustain it, or people are doing it, as on a kind of voluntary basis, almost like community organizing, unsubsidized, and that's been a problem. The notion that there would be citizen media was really replaced by the rise of social media. What happens in social is that people comment. They pass along things that other people have produced, and they comment on them. So this, instead of citizen journalism, in many ways, we have polarized hate speech, or just a more polarized debate. And to some significant degree, and we didn't know this was going to be the case, is that people online and social spaces, social media in general, is kind of a bipolar atmosphere. People are either euphoric or they're very angry. You don't post online and say, this is interesting, I'm not sure what to think about it. It doesn't, that is not defined by the platform companies as significant engagement. And so it doesn't get shares, it doesn't get likes. It's not, the I don't know what this means, the sort of response that a news organization loves, which is, oh, that's interesting, I'll read another story if it ever shows up. That's not a measurable response that the platforms are looking for. The other pro that I think is significant, and I don't think we fully appreciate it, is that the tools for storytelling and thus for understanding news and information has exploded. In one book I did, a book called Blur, we talked about a print story has 6 tools that you could use to tell the story. And those include a headline, a photograph, the story itself, maybe a second story, what we call a sidebar, maybe a pull quote or a graphic. Your list stops at about 6. The tools you have to tell and try and convey the meaning of a story digitally is an endless list that, I stopped counting the list at about 100 of jotting down the potential tools. The challenge for storytellers is which tool is the right one. But imagine the old hardware store and now a modern Lowe's, and all the power tools, all the tools that existed at a super hardware store of the 21st century is similar to the sort of tools we have for storytelling. The other thing I think we did not fully appreciate is that we have built a digital economy that is designed around what separates us. And the platform companies did that so that they could target an ad to you versus versus your spouse versus your engineer. You could sit in a room and everyone in that room would be getting a different social flow and a different set of advertising targeting them. Well, the companies that built that economy, this economy designed to identify what makes us different from each other, did not contemplate the political implications of political actors using that technology to divide people politically. And that's the moment we are in at the moment right now.
Can you talk a little bit about how, so to take, we'll just, this is not a random choice, and there's a reason why I'm picking it for sort of a case study, but when we think about a news outlet like Fox News in the current administration, in the current form that it has taken, is Fox News's power to sort of perpetuate and disseminate what is in many cases, although there's a few examples which we'll talk about, the position and perspective of the administration. Is the damage of that, or the concerning nature of that, mitigated by the existence of online media, or does it end up perpetuating a further echo chamber by virtue of the other online media outlets that just follow Fox News? In other words, is Fox News or maybe I'll just leave it there. In the context of an administration that is as it currently is in its relationship to Fox News, is online media a mitigator or an exacerbator of the problems you describe?
Probably on balance, an exacerbator, but for the following reason.
Yeah.
First off, that one thing that's useful to know is that the trust crisis. We've had basically a 40% drop in trust, 40 percentage point drop in trust over the last 40 years. But half of that decline happened between 1980 and 1997. What was going on? Well, we deregulated our media. And we had the cable explosion, and the FM dial, radio dial exploded. So people had more choices, and many of those new media, and that's how we wrote about talk radio, by the way, in the 90s. We called it new media. Many of those new outlets, since they couldn't compete for audience based on having deep repertorial bench, they competed for audience by marketing themselves around ideological affinity, by being partisan. And talk radio in particular marketed itself as the antidote to the liberal media. And as they did that, and as that got articulated more and more, you saw it reflected back in public opinion polling, and you saw political figures begin to echo the same language and go on those programs and use it as a kind of intercom. So there's, that's a perfect example early of partisan media reinforcing and then building on political polarization. It didn't create it, but it certainly worked hand in glove with it. Now you have a situation, and Fox has existed since 1996 and really gained force during the Bush administration, but it was a subset of the Republican Party. It was not the whole Republican Party, and it was pre-social media. Now Fox is aligned with the Trump administration in a somewhat different way than George Bush's administration was, because his base and Fox's subset of the Republican audience are closely aligned, and he is so responsive. I mean, he really draws on Fox as a kind of intellectual force for him, and so there's a synergy. It's almost a kind of state TV, and that's certainly how it's been described. Now, to what extent does other media mitigate that? Well, some social media is intensifying that, right? If you're part of that, if you want to use, or if you're a subset of that subset, you can echo the influence of Fox, so that whatever their viewership is, 3 million at their peak show in prime time in the evening, it's really a bigger audience. The audience that is mitigating that or arguing with it is an enraged audience that is not a moderate audience. That's what you see in social. The moderate voice, the subtle pushback, that doesn't happen in social, and that's a measurable effect. You just don't push back in a quiet way, and so it's mitigated, but we're both pushed to the edge. And cable does that in general now, anyway. The notion of filter bubbles, which I'm sure you've talked about on the show, which is that people are only getting information from places they agree with, doesn't exist for all topics. We don't have filter bubbles for sports or weather or traffic. But when it comes to national politics, the filter bubble phenomenon, that we only hear what we agree with, has set in, and it's set in because of cable in a significant way. And so social is an echo of that, or a subset if you've got really, hate groups use social, not cable.
So the reason I partially picked Fox News for our conversation is that the next question I want to get to relates to two particular people on Fox News, Shep Smith and Chris Wallace. And they are what I have sometimes called occasional voices of reason on Fox News. And what it really comes down to is when there are blatant lies told by people in the Trump administration, they will mention that they are blatant lies. I mean, it's a relatively low bar to call someone a voice of reason, but in that context, they sort of are. And I'm curious what you think is the sort of net effect effect of their presence on Fox News, because on the one hand, it's really good to at least try to pierce the filter bubble of an audience that may never otherwise see it. They may never be getting alternative points of view. On the other hand, they pierce that bubble in a safely narrow way where they will never question how it is that media outlets like Fox News came to be so big or so intertwined with an administration, for example. And that's really a concern because it's sort of safe dissent. What do you think?
Yeah. So you've touched on, I think, a key issue, which, like all the things we've talked about, cuts both ways. If you're Fox or if you're MSNBC and CNN, you become, to some degree, addicted to the audience that you've built. So Rupert Murdoch did not set out to create Donald Trump, but Donald Trump became a popular figure on Fox. And, you kind of ride the horse that is winning the race. In television land, in television thinking, you do not want to lose the lead-in that you build. So every program is evaluated on how it did relative to keeping the audience that it had when it came on the air. So if you're on at 8 and you build on the audience that you inherited at 7:59, that's good. If you are on at 9 and you start to lose the audience that you inherited at 8:59, that's bad. So there's this sort of snowball effect that happens in cable. And while Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes, who built the Fox empire, imagined a kind of a populist network, I don't think they imagined Trump, but they are stuck with him now. And when he's gone, they will have to reckon with that. That, to some degree, is happening now at CNN and MSNBC. CNN is particularly interesting because their anger and outrage and personal antipathy with Trump, has built an audience in which people say, well, I'm going to turn on the news, but they're really feeding their anger about Trump. It's very hard to kind of remove yourself from that. So, you've created a monster to some degree, kind of like the movie Forbidden Planet, where the monster is our own fears at the end of the film. The interesting thing about, and so that also shows what the limitations of a Shep Smith or Chris Wallace are always going to be. They are they can't antagonize entirely the audience that exists around them that they're speaking to, and yet in an odd way they are more authoritative to that audience because they are they work within the Trump within the Fox imprimatur. When they say something's wrong, it's much more important than if the New York Times says something's wrong. They have the authority of the network and speak to that audience. But the notion that Fox would argue, which is we have a section of the day that is for news and a section of the day that is opinion programming, that's functionally doesn't work. You have the same audience the whole time. You don't have an open-minded audience on one show and then it transforms itself into a different kind of audience when Sean Hannity comes on. You're talking to similar people all day long, but you are having Shep Smith talk to those people. And that is not an unmeaningful thing. It creates parameters around him, but it conveys authority on him.
Yeah, generally the sense that I've had of it. We've been speaking to Tom Rosenstiel, who's an author, journalist, researcher, and media critic. Tom, so great having you, and would love to have you back again since there is so much to talk about related to these issues.
Absolutely. Anytime you want.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So as well orchestrated as the Mueller report public relations campaign was by Donald Trump and the people around him, there's more and more talk of impeachment that's taking place now. Now, in the past, I would have just done this story and not given disclaimers, but because of the climate right now and some of the stuff that's going on with the right, some of the stuff that's going on with the left, I feel like I need to issue some disclaimers before we talk about this. Disclaimer one being that I've said for a long time, I don't see impeachment as the fastest way to get rid of Trump. It's going to take longer than just voting him out in 2020 at this point. Even if you could actually get him out quickly, you aren't going to be able to do it without Republican support, and that is not something that there appears to be. There appears to be no will at all. And I've also pointed out that impeachment is not a political strategy for Democrats. It wasn't one in 2018. It's not going to be a good one for 2020. So that's all of the sort of disclaimers here. But with all of that being said, there's no denying that there's more momentum and discussion about impeachment, and that it has grown significantly since the stunningly damaging nature of the Mueller report was revealed last Thursday. And one of the important things to consider that really is probably the most important, what could you impeach Donald Trump for at this point in time? He's said before, why would you impeach a president that's doing a great job? That's sort of one cartoonishly ridiculous perspective. But here's another, or there is another at least. And the other is now more than ever that impeachment should be seriously discussed. And it's being discussed by more and more Democratic elected officials and also more and more media. If you checked out yesterday's Sunday political talk shows, there was a ton of impeachment discussion. Senator Elizabeth Warren is now straight up saying impeachment proceedings should start. Congressman Jerry Nadler said yesterday on Meet the Press that the content of the Mueller report contains impeachable offenses. Check that out.
Do you think this is impeachable?
Yeah, I do. I do think that this, if proven, which hasn't been proven yet, some of this, if proven, some of this would be impeachable, yes.
All right.
Obstruction of justice, if proven, would be impeachable.
And you're going to go about to see if you can prove it?
Well, we're going to see where the facts lead us.
Congressman Elijah Cummings is putting it in sort of different language, saying if Democrats don't do anything, it will just embolden Donald Trump, which is true, although he's pretty emboldened at this point in time. But the point is Trump going to be allowed to get away with this degree of wrongdoing? Adam Schiff says that the Mueller report contains impeachable offenses.
And Congressman Schiff, let's turn to impeachment. Senator Elizabeth Warren has tweeted, the severity of this misconduct demands that elected officials in both parties set aside political considerations and do their constitutional duty. That means the House should initiate impeachment proceedings against the President of the United States. You've said, unless there's bipartisan support for it, it is a bad idea. But what about that constitutional duty or any precedent that this might set?
Well, look, I think Elizabeth Warren makes an important point, and that is that the level of evidence in the Mueller report is serious and damning, and in a normal circumstance would be, I think, without question within the realm of impeachable offenses. We are, unfortunately, in an environment today where the GOP leadership, people like Kevin McCarthy, are willing to carry the president's water no matter how corrupt or unethical or dishonest the president's conduct may be.
Now, if you've watched this show for any length of time, you know that I have never called for impeachment. I've pointed out that I believe it's not a winning strategy. It's not likely to succeed. At this point, there are faster ways to get rid of the President of the United States, and I'm still not calling for impeachment. But there is a real question right now of if there are no consequences for this, if there aren't even repercussions for what's in the Mueller report, including substantial evidence of obstruction, can a president ever be held accountable in modern politics, or will the existence of this sort of 30% immutable, unchangeable base of support and the political will that goes along with it in our elected officials, does that mean that a president can never face consequences? Because that's close to where we are if we say, despite all the evidence, despite what Mueller said, for political reasons, there are not going to be consequences for Donald Trump. Because remember, Mueller's explanation for not indicting the president is 95% political. He believed it would hinder Trump's ability to be president. He was aware of the Justice Department sort of tradition, guidance that you can indict or should not indict a sitting president. That's as close to codifying the president as being above the law as is possible. So I understand the feeling from Democrats of exasperation, of knowing that they don't seem to be able to get any Republican to care about what the Mueller report exposes and what has transpired. And I understand the feeling that, hey, are we just letting Trump get away with everything? I totally understand that. The practical reality is still that without Republicans, you're not doing anything as far as impeachment goes, and that it's probably faster to just vote Trump out in November of 2020. Tomorrow on the show, I'm going to address this idea that impeaching Trump is a bad idea because Pence is worse, which I have talked about before. My view on that has changed significantly, and I'm actually going to address that on tomorrow's program. But in the meantime, I want to hear your thoughts. Has your view on impeachment changed as a result of the content of the Mueller probe? If so, how? And how are you now sort of feeling about it? We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. I got a voicemail from a 19-year-old with a golden voice, truly a voice for radio, with a question. He wants some advice from me. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David. So I'm a 19-year-old college student. My name's Spencer. So people say I have a good radio voice, and I've also, really like to talk politics and sort of share my views with people, but I'd like some advice. So I kind of worry that my ideas are not original, or that, if I start like a blog or something, that it wouldn't take off, or, that people will laugh at like what I have to say, or like what my ideas are about like the current situation. I was kind of wondering, like, did you have the like same concerns when you started the show? And, like what made you want to start the David Pakman Show? And like what hurdles did you have to overcome, and, whatever other advice you would have for me?
Yeah, listen, here's the thing. Your voice sounds great. I don't really think it matters that much. I think most people, unless you have like really a vocal issue where your voice is problematic in some way, and this does exist, you don't have it. Most of the voice stuff can kind of be learned. You just get comfortable talking into a microphone. Here's the thing. You're going to have to get over quick if you want to do anything in political media, the idea that people might laugh at, disagree with, or criticize what you're doing, or they might call it trash. They might call it worthless. They will call you worthless. At some point, you're going to have to get over that, and that's the biggest thing I had to get over. If you listen to like the first 3 months of this show back from 2009 or 2005, I'm sorry, you will notice that I was playing it down the middle a lot, and it's very boring and it's stupid, and I barely knew how to talk into a microphone. I just had to get over the fact that me doing a show where I pretend to be, just seeing both sides of every issue, it's boring for me, it's boring for the audience, and I just had to bite the bullet and say, you know what? I'm going to do the stories as I see them. You get used to the criticism. You get used to, in my case, the anti-Semitic comments. And if you want to do it, you're just going to have to get over that. That's really the big thing, more than your voice or anything like that. Feel free to get in touch if you have more questions. Glad to talk to you about it and talk you through it if you want. We've got a great bonus show for you today. I'll talk about a Passover fiasco that took place over the weekend and much more. That's it for today. New show, new bonus show tomorrow. Bonus show right now for our members and patrons.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.